Where do artists come up with their titles? Well, you might start by thinking, where did I get my name? Most people are named by a parent. And if you ask your parents, some of them probably have very deep stories about where they came from. They might have come from something in their past, or the best friend in college, or a grandparent or something. And some people might have said, I really love that name in a book. I used to work with a woman who said that her mother was pregnant and she was sitting somewhere and she saw a semi truck drive by with a name on it. And it was just a word, but that's how she got her name. I think people get names in all kinds of ways. And if you've ever named a child, you might be in the position where you understand that sometimes, you just don't know, and there's a kid and you want to have a name. So that can happen. All of those things probably relate to how artists come up with titles. Titles come to artworks in many ways, and artists think of titles differently. So sometimes I think we think of the title as the meaning. So that's like the summary for the artwork. I need to see what I'm looking at, and I want to understand what I'm looking at. So I'm going to look at the label, and maybe the title will tell me what it's supposed to mean. For some artists, that's probably very true, that they'll say, scene of a setting in Hudson River Valley, New York. And so you know that you are looking at that. The thing about that is, that just actually says what you're looking at. It's a definition of it, but it doesn't actually tell you what that means. It does give you more, it makes you maybe feel more comfortable, particularly if you don't know what you're looking at. But so sometimes that happens, that you might have that. Even then, I invite you to try to look again and think, but what is the real meaning about this? Like, what would I want to look at? What's the interesting part for me? So that's one way titles might come. Some artists purposefully make them a little bit more complicated. So they might say something like, you'll see a scene of a landscape, and then it'll say something about like dreams or the night, or maybe it'll refer to some mythological figure. And that's another way that artists might use it to give you a different level of meaning and actually push your thought in a different way. So rather than telling you what you're looking at, telling you something you might be wanting to think about. Another way the titles come. Many artists famously won't tell you where they get their titles. They often look like there's just no resonance between what you're looking at, and you're even as hard as you think, you can't get to that. And that's another way to kind of, artists are confounding us on purpose. They're trying to kind of push us, because titling is a little bit challenging, right? Because if you think about it, if you've ever had to make a title for something or name a person, that's a lot of pressure. That's a very hard thing to do. And if your artwork sometimes maybe is a lot of ideas, and it's something maybe you're a very visual person too, to put those into words, to put on a label, it might be something that you don't feel as part of your artistic practice. Another thing that happens is that titles historically for artwork aren't exact. They have some complicated factors. So, if you look at works that are very old, historic works, like things, from 1 AD, those works often either were titled and the titles are lost. And so somebody who's a scholar might have put the title on it, landscape. Or sometimes people would change titles. So an artist might call it something and then change the title. And so you would, because the work would be in their studio. And so they called it this when they were going to sell it, and then they changed it. They called this. So sometimes titles you'll see are actually not to do with the artist, but oftentimes about other parts of the artwork's history. The final thing is that a lot of times artists choose not to title it. So when you see the word untitled, it can, and actually that's a very complicated thing. Sometimes it means the artist literally didn't title it and they chose not to. Sometimes they call it untitled. And so untitled, the word could be a title, which is sort of a complicated concept. It would be like naming a child no name. So your child could either be a blank or no name. The thing about it is, if you met a person who had no name, what would that be like? Well, you would all of a sudden have to come up with something. And maybe your brain is a little bit like my brain. When I see somebody that I haven't met their name, I often will conjure a name. Like I said, oh, she looks like a, they look like a, and that's because we're always trying to make meaning. We're looking at things, we get so much visual stimuli all the time. And many people, you know, in our society, we're a verbal society, they want to make meaning through text. And so when you get an untitled object, you're getting an invitation. So if they chose to call it untitled, or it is just untitled, you either way have this option to put in your ideas. And for me, that's one of the most powerful things about untitled. They're not even asking your brain to try to decide where that landscape is or what the meaning of the landscape is. They're not giving you any hints, which could be overwhelming. But there's also no wrong answer, right? There's no, it's not like a test where you have to look at it and try to guess what it is. There's no answer. It's the answers that are in you. And, you know, learning more about the artist, reading the like labels or knowing things about the artist when you walk in can help, but none of those are necessary because you're standing in a room where there is an object and there's no wrong answer. In life, there's very few things where there is no wrong answer at all. And I think in this chance, you have an opening to enjoy yourself. So that's where artists come up with titles everywhere.